select Identities. And on Microsoft Defender for Identity page, examine the content of the Sensors section. This indicates a problem with the sensor running on the Contoso domain controller. By reviewing its more detailed status,